North and South differences. Life in the North had crowded, dirty cities, many inventors, and blacks were semi-free. They had different beliefs than the South. They believed if you were poor and worked hard that you could become rich. They had the Erie Canal. Life in the South mostly relied on slavery. They worked their slaves in plantations. They got plenty of money from the cotton. They also worked on very hot summers. And the trouble began with land. When more states started to join the United States, North was concerned about more slaves than free states. So they tried to make laws that allowed even amounts of states to be slave and free states, but it didn't work. After some time, some uneasy laws were made to decide the land issues. The Compromise of 1850. The Compromise was a craft-made decision made to make everything between the North and the South even. But it continued in the North when South owners were allowed to go north to reclaim slaves. After a while, the North took action and fought against the slave owners against taking slaves. Kansas and Nebraska. Kansas and Nebraska were two undivided states that were undervoting. Members of North and South flooded in to Kansas and Nebraska trying to win over the votes. After the voting, the South won and Kansas became a slave state. This caused lots of fighting between the North and the South. The Fugitive Slave Act. The Fugitive Slave Act was a law that allowed slave owners to go up north and recapture slaves. Officers were paid $5 to say they were free, but $10 to say they were slave. The raid on Harper's Ferry. John Brown and his sons went to raid the South's biggest gun arsenal, Harper's Ferry, believing an army of slaves would help them revolt. When the slaves were a no-show, his sons died in the shootout, and John Brown was caught and hung. The Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott was a slave that sued because he was taken from a slave state up to a free state, and he believed that he was free. In the end, the court found him to be still a slave, and he was brought back down to the South because he was already in the South to begin with. Abraham Lincoln election. The election of 1860 proved that the North and South could no longer get along. 11 southern states seceded from the Union, and the Civil War began. They were enraged that Abraham Lincoln had become president and were afraid that their culture would be ruined.